Shalom, it's after Thanksgiving, it's before Hanukkah. This year the two come close together. I know for our Christian neighbors they've got Christmas coming up, a lot of family time. And the Torah portion in 2010, which fits right between Hanukkah and Thanksgiving, or Thanksgiving and Hanukkah, is vayeshev, and it has a lot of very practical advice indirectly through the stories for how to get along with families and how not to get along with families. Our interfaith Thanksgiving service theme this year was Love Thy Neighbor as Thyself, which is a beautiful expression from the Torah, but one of the participants said to me, "But you don't know my neighbor." Well, if getting along with neighbors is tough, getting along with family can be even tougher. So what is the story and the advice from parashat vayeshev? Well, first of all, vayeshev means and he's settled, and Rashi, the great medieval commentator, responds to that by saying that when it says vayeshev, he's settled, Jacob made the mistake of thinking his life was settled. He had his 13 kids, he was now in Canaan, the land of Israel, thought everything would be fine, but don't ever assume that things are just going to be tranquil. You got to always be prepared for what's coming, because he hadn't seen anything yet in terms of what's coming. So what happens in the parsha? Well, in the first few verses of parashat vayeshev, we have the following. We have Joseph is now 17 years old, and remember, there are 2 wives and 2 concubines. Joseph is the full brother of younger brother Benjamin. He's the only 2 boys of Rachel, whom of course Jacob loves so much. And the Torah is very clear that Jacob favors Joseph over his 10 brothers, and not including Benjamin. And he demonstrates that by giving Joseph this coat of many colors. That's where they get this Broadway show, Coat of Joseph and the Coat of Many Colors. So how do you think his brothers felt about that? And then Jacob sends Joseph to go tell about what his brothers are doing. Now, they're older brothers. They're supposed to be tending sheep, but according to the commentators, they're probably in town, carousing around, having fun. And Joseph reports that. It says he brings evil reports to his father. So not only does Jacob favor Joseph explicitly and demonstrably, but now Joseph is gossiping about him. And then Joseph has a couple of dreams. Now, you don't always have to say everything on your mind, but Joseph decides to, and he tells his brothers that he's going to lord it over them. He's got these dreams which are going to say that eventually he's going to be the rule over them. Well, you add all these together, Jacob makes the horrible mistake of saying that he favors one son over the others. Joseph then tattles on his brothers, and then you have Joseph telling his brothers he's going to lord it over them. Of course they hate him. And things are just repeating itself from the last generation when Jacob caused so much grief with his brother Esau. He cheated him out of his birthright. He deceived Isaac to give the blessing meant for Esau to Jacob. And then, of course, he was deceived by his own father-in-law. We see this continuing in the families. Now, there's an interesting passage where Joseph is then sent to go find his brothers, and this is before there was GPS and road maps. And he encounters a man along the way, and the man tells him where the guy went. Now, we don't know who this man was, but of course he changes all of history, because if Joseph would not have found his brothers in the text, then he wouldn't have been tossed in the pit, he wouldn't have been sold into slavery, he wouldn't have risen to be the number 2 guy in all of the world distributing the grain, he wouldn't have reconciled with his brothers perhaps, and so those chance encounters can really mean a lot. But we don't know who that man is. Now, when we had this story before, a couple weeks ago, when Jacob was wrestling with that being, and the commentators had all those different ideas about who it could be, his brother's guardian angel, himself. Maimonides says that God sent an angel to make sure that Jacob stayed there and did what he had to do to grow up. Well, Maimonides makes the same comment here about the person that Joseph meets, along the road to direct him. That it was God sent that angel to tell Joseph he better go and follow the path he's supposed to be, because he's got to mature, which he in fact does. Because now, in the end of the story in this parsha, when Reuben and Judah both semi-emerge as a hero, although not completely, they did leave their brother to die. In one version of the story, Judah sort of saves his life, and another version, Reuben sort of saves his life. Well, when Joseph then gets sold into servitude to Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, we have there Joseph resists. That's a remarkable story too. Now, there's one other story in this parsha which gets little attention, but it's very interesting, where Judah had these 3 sons, and his daughter-in-law Tamar marries the first one, and he dies, and marries the second one, he dies. And the third one, Onan, refuses to marry her because he saw what happened to his brothers, and he commits what we call Onanism. And then Judah doesn't give Tamar another son. So later she dresses as a prostitute, and Judah hires her, not knowing it's his daughter-in-law, and she gets pregnant. And he says to her, "How should I pay you? Should I give you some for my flock?" She says, "No, give me your staff and your ring." Later on, he's told that she's pregnant, not knowing it's him. He's the father. He says she should be burned for that. And instead of confronting him directly, she says, "Okay, but whoever owns this signet and this staff and this ring, that's the one responsible." And Judah then steps forward like a man and says, "No, it was me." And of course, one of the sons born to her, Perez, becomes the grandfather by 10 generations of King David. Very interesting. So we learn a lot in this story to help us guide us through Thanksgiving and Hanukkah and Christmas, whatever holiday you're observing, about don't favor a child. You know, my mother always jokes I'm her favorite son, but the competition is not too stiff because I'm her only son. Now, if she said that about one of my two sisters, that they were their favorite daughter, that'd be trouble. Don't gossip about your brothers. Don't tell them that you're going to lord it over them. Don't tattle on them. Step up and be a person, and just saving your brother from death but leaving him to languish in a pit, be sold into slavery, is no big, great achievement. And when you've got to confront someone about the truth, be delicate, the way it was with Tamar and the way she said it to Judah. And then, of course, you've got to conquer your challenges like Joseph did in resisting Potiphar's wife. Now, at the end of the parsha, he's left languishing in jail. The good deed he did to the Pharaoh's servant to get him out of jail was forgotten, of course. And you might think, if this is the end of the story, that Joseph had a miserable life. But we're soon to see the rest of the story, and that's another lesson for us, is never give up. Even if you're in the bottom of a pit, or even if you're in a jail cell, there could be a good life ahead. There probably is. God has good in store for you. Shalom.